This is the second recording of my learner who is in grade 6.
Rice terraces of the Philippines Cordilleras. The rice terraces of the Philippines Cordillera are the outstanding symbol of a developed living culture landscape. They can be traced as 2 million ago in the fresh Lucian Philippines. They are found in the remote areas of the Philippines Cordilleras mountain range in the northern island of Luzon, Philippines, archipelago. There's historic terraces over in the extensive area in the protected consists of 5 cultures, the most intact and impressive structures located in 4 municipalities in are a product of the Ifugao ethnic group, a Imotori community has lived on these mountains for 200 of years. The 5 cultures are one that the Nagtain Terrace cluster in the municipality of Kainga into distinct round of terraces divided by river to hang down terraces cluster speed like a spider. With number 3 that central Mayoyaw terraces cluster the character by terraces in the intervals in the attribution and alone negrais. Number 4 Bang terraces cluster in Banawe, the background of the physical Ifugao village, and 5 the baited terraces close of Banawe that lies in semi-circular terraces right a village of the base. The Ifugao rice terraces are died example of living culture landscape beauty beyond compare. In Ifugao, rice terraces are village contribution of the ancestors mankind. They are built 2,000 years ago and past the generation of example of the civilization that ever come change passed by modernization on steeper slope of height of mountain of the careful of the funeral scape of hills that Ifugao rice terraces have complete systems. Water comes from the forest of the mountain tops. The mountains of the living rice terraces is low that whole community works as one if days of no knowledge of the rich variety of biological resources rich exist in the Ifugao agri-ecosystem. Rice terraces of the Philippines Cordilleras. The rice terraces of the Philippines Cordillera are the outstanding symbol of a developed
Cordilleras was mispronounced as Cordillera, while is was substituted by r, and the article an was also substituted by the. Moreover, the learner also mispronounced outstanding as outing standing. Example was substituted with sample, and was substituted with a, and evolved was substituted with developed.
living culture landscape. There
Cultural was substituted with culture, and that was substituted with then.
can be traced the as 2 million ago.
Traced was substituted with trust, and the learner also inserted the article the in between traced and far. Furthermore, the learner also omitted the phrase far back as and unsuccessfully corrected himself on the word millennia, where he initially substituted it with million and million on the second attempt.
Fresh Lucian Philippines.
Pre-colonial was mispronounced as Preslucian.
They are found in
The was substituted with they, and the word terraces was omitted. Also, located was substituted with found.
the remote parts of the Philippines, Cordilleras Mountain.
Area was mispronounced as ours.
Range in the northern island of
On was substituted with in, and the learner also initially inserted the in between an and extensive. Meanwhile, area was mispronounced again as r, and in between r and the learner also inserted in.
Luzon, Philippines, Archipelago.
Philippine was mispronounced as Philippines. Archipelago was mispronounced as Adripelago.
There's historic
While was omitted, and the word the was substituted with theirs.
terraces over
Cover was mispronounced as kuber.
the extensive are in the
An was substituted with in, and in between an and extensive, the learner inserted the. Area was mispronounced as r, and in between area and the learner inserted in.
protective consisti
Inscribed was omitted, and property was mispronounced as protecti. Meanwhile, consist was also mispronounced as consisti.
of 5 cultures. The
Clusters was substituted with cultures, and the word of was omitted.
most intact
The learner omitted and.
in impressive traces.
Impressive was initially mispronounced as imp, but the learner corrected himself on the second attempt. However, terraces was mispronounced as traxes.
Located in 4 municipalities in are a product of the
Municipalities was initially mispronounced as mu, and then the learner tried to self-correct by substituting municipalities. They was substituted with in, and the words are and all were repeated twice. The learner also omitted the word the, and he mispronounced the word product with product.
Ifugao Enetic Group,
Ethnic was mispronounced as enetic.
a motory
Minority was mispronounced as motori.
Community has the live on this.
That was omitted, and the learner inserted the in the middle of has and occupied. Occupied was substituted with live, and in the middle of occupied and this, the learner inserted on.
Mountains for 2 hands of year.
Thousands was mispronounced as 2 hands, and years was mispronounced as year.
The 5 cultures are
Inscribed was omitted, and clusters was substituted with cultures.
one that the Nigerian terrace.
Da was initially substituted with that, but the learner successfully corrected himself on his second attempt. Nagkakadan was mispronounced as nagkatime.
Cluster in the municipality of Kainga in
Cluster was mispronounced as cluster, and municipality was also mispronounced as municipality. Kiangan was initially mispronounced as kaing, but then the learner unsuccessfully corrected himself by substituting it with kainga.
2 district round of terrace divided by river.
A rice terrace cluster manifested was omitted. Distinct was initially mispronounced as this, and then the learner tried to self-correct by mispronouncing it again as distive. Ascending was also omitted, and rose was mispronounced as roan. Terraces was also mispronounced as terrace, and bisected was substituted with divide. The word was also omitted, and river was mispronounced as raber.
2 hang down terraces cluster.
Hongduan was mispronounced as hang down. Terrace was mispronounced as terraces, and cluster was mispronounced as clouster.
Speed like a spider. With not
The phrase that uniquely emerges into was omitted, and in between into and the learner inserted speed like. Moreover, the word web was initially mispronounced as we, and then he unsuccessfully corrected himself by mispronouncing it again as wib.
number 3 that central mayoyaw
The was substituted with that.
terraces cluster the character by
Terrace was mispronounced as terraces. Cluster was also mispronounced as cluster, which was omitted, and was substituted with the. Characterize was also substituted with character.
terraces in the intervals in the attribution.
In between the words terraces and interspersed, the learner inserted in the, and interspersed was mispronounced as tervals. With was substituted with in, and in between with and traditional, the learner also inserted the. Traditional was substituted with adrekusyon.
And alone nagkarais.
The phrase farmer's valley or houses was omitted, and alang was substituted with alone. Same with granaries, which was substituted with nagkrais.
Number 4 bang terraces cluster in Banawe.
Da was omitted, and bangaan was mispronounced as bang. Terrace was mispronounced as terraces, and cluster was mispronounced as cluster. The phrase the municipality was also omitted, and of was also omitted.
But the background of the physical ipugaw.
The was substituted with that, and backdrops was substituted with background. A was substituted with of, and in between a and typical, the learner inserted the. Additionally, typical was substituted with physical.
Ipugaw village, and
Traditional was omitted and village was mispronounced as village.
5. The baited terraces close of
Batad was mispronounced as baited and terrace was also mispronounced as terraces. Moreover, cluster was mispronounced as clouster.
Banawe that lies in
The phrase the municipality of was omitted and Banawe was initially mispronounced as Banan, but on the second attempt the learner successfully corrected himself. Is was omitted and nestled was substituted with lies.
semicular terraces right a village of the base.
Amphitheater-like was omitted and circular was mispronounced as cular. With was substituted with right. At was substituted with of and its was substituted with the.
The Ifugao rice terraces are dyed example
An was omitted and ideal was substituted with died.
of living culture handscape.
A was omitted and cultural was substituted with culture. Landscape was mispronounced as handscape.
Beauty beyond compare.
Off was omitted and beyond was mispronounced as beyun. Compare was mispronounced as compire.
In Ifugao, rice terraces are village
The learner substituted the with in and valuable was mispronounced as village.
contribution of the
Contribution was mispronounced as contribution and hour was substituted with the.
ancestors mankind day.
Ancestors was mispronounced as ancestors and two was omitted. Mankind was mispronounced as mankind.
Are built 2,000 years ago and
Built was mispronounced as bolt.
past the generation of
On was substituted with the. Also, the learner substituted through with the. Moreover, generations was mispronounced as generation and was substituted with of.
and inska example of the
Example was initially mispronounced as inska, but on the second attempt, the learner successfully corrected himself. An was substituted with the, and ancient was mispronounced as ancient.
television that ever come change passed by modernization.
Civilization was mispronounced as civilization. Overcome was initially mispronounced as ever, and then the learner tried to self-correct only to mispronounce it again with evercome. Challenges was substituted with change, and modernization was mispronounced as modernmission.
On stapler slope of height of
Built was omitted and stipper was substituted with stapler. Slopes was mispronounced as slope and high was substituted with height.
mountain of the careful of the
Mountains was mispronounced as mountain and was substituted with of, and careful was initially mispronounced as care, but then on the second attempt the learner successfully corrected himself. Carving was omitted.
funeral scape of
Natural was substituted with funeral. Shapes was mispronounced as scape and thou was omitted.
hills that if Bugao rice terraces
The was substituted with that.
have complete systems.
Complex was substituted with complete and irrigation was omitted.
Water comes from the forest of the mountain tops.
Forest was mispronounced as forest and off was initially mispronounced as on, but then on the second attempt the learner corrected himself.
The mountains of the living
Maintenance was substituted with mountains.
rice terraces is low that whole community works as one.
Shows was substituted with slow. Da was omitted, and whole was mispronounced as wool.
If days of no knowledge of the
Is was omitted, and on was substituted with of. Da was also omitted, and knowledge was mispronounced as knowledge.
rich variety of biological resources.
Rich was repeated twice, and variety was mispronounced as varity. Biological was mispronounced too as biological.
Rich exist in the Ifugao agri ecosystem.
Which was substituted with rich.